Hey there, humans and assorted quadrupeds. I thought I would go ahead and do a quick little 10-minute tutorial on how I color different metal textures in Procreate. I get asked about this one fairly frequently on some of my bigger pieces, so let's go ahead and do a little demo, shall we? I'm going to do 3. I don't know if you put it together yet, which ones they're going to be, but let's get in. We're going to start with iron, because that's kind of a nice neutral type metal, and doesn't have to be iron, just any kind of dull type material. I'm going to go ahead, I'm using my text layers here as a clipping mask, so I'm going to go ahead and put a clipping mask layer over top of them. And if you don't know, all that does is it means that anything I color in this layer now will stay bounded to the layer that it's pointing to underneath. If I turn that clipping mask off, that's what that looks like. Great technique, simple tool, love it. Okay. So with that in place, I'm going to pick kind of a dark gray. I always like to have a little bit of a tint to it. Iron's kind of warm, so we'll go there. And I'm just going to put down a base tone, nice and simple. I might even go a little bit darker than that. Done. Now I'm going to add another clipping mask on top of that, and they will all just go down to the bottom layer that they're pointing to with that little arrow there. Again, just a really simple, nice tool. I'm going to take a soft brush. I'm using my Houndsong Academy set here. And I'm just going to do a simple shading situation for this. So I'm going to pick a pretty light color, almost white, bigger brush, soft touch across. And then I'm going to do the same thing with a darker color down here. Across the bottom. Shrink my brush a little darker. Put that core shadow in there. And then same size brush, go a little bit lighter than we did before and put that kind of core tight highlight in there. Nice, simple, iron-ish texture there. Now, if we want that to be a duller texture, we want, in that case, to have more of a gradient between the different highlights and shadows. I can go ahead and use my Gaussian blur filter to really smooth that out, or back to where it was. So that is a great way to simulate kind of how matte or shiny or gloss the texture of the material is. Obviously, the minimum is going to be whatever you painted to begin with. We'll talk about that a little bit more when I do the chrome up above in just a second. If you want to add a little extra pop to it, you can add another layer or do it in the same layer, but I like to keep my layers separate. And then use one of Procreate's many material brushes to add maybe a little bit of noise. Let's see. I messed with a bunch of these. Noise brush works pretty well, and you can do that, you know, add a little bit extra towards the highlights and a little bit extra towards the shadows, and really kind of even kind of alternate a little bit, put a little bit of the dark up in the light area, put a little bit of the light down in the dark area, and really quick, simple metal texture, love it. Let's do brass next. It's going to be a variation on kind of the same idea. So we're going to use our clipping mask tool once again. I'm going to pick a nice, my Academy brushes here, nice kind of mid, and I don't want to go super saturated. That's the biggest mistake I see a lot with kind of new student artists when they're just starting out, is everything wants to be super saturated colors. Really, in nature, you want to kind of stick towards the middle here. Like, take a photograph of anything and then use the eyedropper tool in any program, and you're going to find that almost all colors you see day to day fall kind of in this range here, with very few exceptions for like really bright flowers or deliberately bright products, things that have painted a very saturated color. But generally, you want to stay within this middle tone here while you're painting, and then use those bright pops very selectively. So I'm going to pick kind of this, a little bit more yellow. There we are. All right, somewhere around that range. Doesn't have to be perfect. And I'm just going to color in that whole area. Great. Another one. Boom. And you could do this all on the same layer. I'm just breaking it out because it's nice to be able to mess with them individually when we so choose. Now, little trick with like brass and copper and gold is you've got a little bit more color in the shadows most of the time, and your lighting conditions will affect this, but we're going to keep this pretty sterile for now, very studio lighting. So instead of just going straight down towards black or straight down towards desaturated, I'm going to go a little bit more this way and probably a little bit more orange for my shadow. And I'm going to go kind of a smaller brush, like so. And then brass tends to have these very bright yellow highlights. And I think what I'm actually going to do is even grab one of my like hard edge brushes for my brightest colors. Bigger, 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 bigger. And do a couple of like really hard, not like perfectly in sequence highlights there. And we do the same thing with my shadows. And I'm going to use my recent history to go back down here. A little bit darker, even a little bit redder. Excellent. And I'm not keeping that super even. I'm letting there be a little variation in there. All right, super cool. Happy with that. Again, we could always go through into a Gaussian blur and say, you know, it's more or less shiny, but I'm going to leave that as is for now. Now let's do our chrome brush. Now chrome is a little bit trickier. Any kind of mirrored super shiny surface, like more so than our iron here. Pattern should be looking pretty familiar right now. I'm gonna go to like a light blue, super almost white. Color all that in. That's gonna be my base color. And maybe a little bit darker, a little bit bluer. That's okay. There we go. Now, any kind of shiny reflective surface is super, super dependent on your environment. So I'm going to assume that this is in kind of like a studio lighting situation, maybe with like a blue sky up above it. But again, it's one of those things where if I take a mirror into the forest, it's going to look green. If I take a mirror into the desert, it's going to be brown and blue, or cloudy or whatever. So it just really super depends. So you got to be a little bit artistic with it and kind of decide in your head, like what is the room or the landscape that this thing is sitting in. But we're going to be fairly general with it right now. Now, the thing with chrome is we want a really hard highlight, or a really hard contrast, rather. So I'm going to use my selection tool to grab this area here. And let's pick kind of a like neutral gray, dark. There we go. And I'm going to grab that soft brush again. But because I have that hard edge with the selection tool, when I color it like this, it's going to leave me that really crisp edge in there, and that's kind of catching the horizon within this thing. Or, if you want to be real fancy, and you happen to, I don't know, have bought one of my brushes, you can grab one of my little cheater brushes here, and just have a brush that does it for you. I'm not the only one who's ever done that. There's plenty of brushes like it, but always a fan of working smarter, not harder. I'm going to just use my Shapes tool to adjust that a little bit. Now I'm going to add a little bit of blue sky in here. There we go. Kind of fill that in some. And maybe some like darker earth tones. I'm going to grab that brown I used before, take it up here. Nailed it. And once again, we want to smudge that up. Okay, this is a little bit rougher, a little bit maybe dirtier, I don't know, all the way up to very satin finish, almost like, I don't know, MacBook type sandblasted look. I like kind of this slight blur to it, so it's not a perfect mirror finish. But there we are. That is a really simple metallic color tutorial. You can see how it looks on different backgrounds. Here we go. Yeah, no, I hope you enjoyed that. All right, see you around.